It seems that the Kremlin has made its choice regarding the candidate for the presidency of Ukraine.
The problem is that, after the collapse of the USSR, Nazis hold significant influence in Ukraine. This is something that few people mention now. In 2017, the US Congress labeled Azov a terrorist and anti-Semitic organization. Azov, which was like that then, remains the same today.
Hello, my name is Kateryna Soliar, and there will be no usual countdown of time because here, as in a vacuum, only one time is frozen: 24 hours left. 24 hours until Putin makes another set of demands to Ukraine. And, by the way, do you know what I've noticed? Perhaps soon Russia will adjust its clocks. They'll just move them forward by 7 hours, in sync with the United States. Because now, Putin has to make statements in the middle of the night to make sure Trump hears them. The Kremlin patient took a trip to Murmansk to meet with submarine sailors on the nuclear cruiser Archangel and said some things there. So get ready, I won't go over everything, but let's still go through the main points. Russia has no intention of making mistakes based on trust in so-called Western partners. Russia, of course, is ready to work on a Ukrainian settlement, not a Russian one, on a Ukrainian settlement with Europe, but there, as always, they are trying to lead by the nose. Civil authorities in Ukraine are not legitimate. If Zelensky is illegitimate, then so is everyone else. It will soon reach the point where the Ukrainian people in Ukraine will be considered illegitimate. Russia doesn't understand who to sign agreements with because tomorrow, other leaders might come. And of course, the quote, I said just recently, we will squeeze them, but there are grounds to believe we will crush them. It smells like peace. And, of course, Russia needs to ensure long-term security for the historical perspective. And in Ukraine, there should be temporary administration under the UN's auspices to hold elections and remove Zelensky.
Putin says that it is necessary to introduce temporary governance in Ukraine under the auspices of the UN. And he says that he and his partners are ready to help us with that. Isn't that something? And who are Putin's partners? North Korea, Iran, and Belarus. Who exactly is going to help us? The Iranians will set up a council in Kyiv to manage corruption, with a North Korean to handle military and civilian matters. As for the Verkhovna Rada, Putin won't be able to send anyone there, and neither will he be able to send anyone to the presidency. Another ethnic Russian from Belarus will be needed, of course. And again, the Russians seem to think we'll accept this. We won't, and we certainly won't accept it. But Putin is bringing this up because he wants to stir things up with Trump and increase the pressure, raising the stakes in the process. What's he saying? In principle, of course, it could be discussed under the auspices of the UN, the US, with European countries, partners, and friends, the possibility of introducing a temporary administration in Ukraine to conduct democratic elections. This is coming from a dictator in a country where elections have never taken place. Never once.
So, I suggest we immediately reject all this rhetoric, especially the phrase, we will crush everyone, which is not up for discussion. We know and see the casualty figures of Russia because, in fact, there are two main narratives in those words of Putin. The first, of course, is the attempt to push Trump into taking action against Azov, whose commander, Colonel Denis Prokopenko, will lead one of the army corps that are being formed right now. And perhaps there was also a hint at Colonel Andriy Bilitsky, the commander of the 3rd Assault Brigade. These are some of the most effective units in the armed forces of Ukraine, so Putin is trying to halt their expansion by appealing to Trump. And the second, of course, is the attempt to show initiative in peace negotiations. And the second, of course, is the attempt to show initiative in peace negotiations and to propose his idea for settlement, essentially an alternative plan for transferring Ukraine under external control, in order to conduct elections. So, once again, it's an attempt at delegitimizing the current government. It's an effort to present Ukraine as a failed state.
Putin stated that there is a significant problem occurring in Ukraine. The problem is Azov, which, according to his fantasies, is gaining actual power. And overall, he claims that nationalists have more influence and more power than the government. Listen, but maybe the government is made up of nationalists. Putin's world has closed in on itself. How? Yes, they all love Ukraine. Not all of them, except the corrupt ones. They love money, and we'll lock them up in prisons when the war is over. But look, when Kuchma was re-elected for a second term, he promised Russian as the state language with Medvedchuk, but his first press conference was in Ukrainian. When Kuchma met Putin, he brought in children who were singing Ukrainian carols. And that's when Putin realized that even Kuchma, the former director, the Red Director, the Elon Musk of his time, who launched rockets into space, even he was a nationalist. Now imagine if Putin had hair, how it would stand on end when he saw Yushchenko. Just the very tip of his fingers would twitch because Yushchenko was a nationalist to the core, the one who later glorified Bandera. The one who gave him the title of Hero of Ukraine. That's what Putin sees. And now, he observes as hundreds of thousands of patriotic, nationalist Ukrainians grow in strength, determination, and conviction in battle, fiercely defending their country and its sovereignty. If, in just 30 years, Ukraine has given rise to such remarkable generations throughout its history, and just imagine how much this decade-long war will leave an indelible mark on the nation's collective memory. This conflict will forge a memory that lasts for generations, because the deepest and most lasting memories are those formed in blood, the memory that Russia is the enemy. And this patriotism, this statehood, will be cemented forever.
But Putin's peace initiatives, well, let me tell you, that's something entirely new. Up until now, all the initiatives came from the United States, from Europe, from Ukraine, ceasefires for 30 days, ceasefires in the sky, at sea, in energy, a complete, comprehensive ceasefire, whatever kind of ceasefire you wanted. And now, suddenly, Putin puts forward his own initiative. And since Trump seriously considers everything Putin proposes, he's making his move. Under Joe Biden's presidency or any other, we wouldn't even pay attention to what Putin says. No one listens to them anymore. But when Putin speaks directly in front of Trump, that's the moment when you really need to pause, reflect, and carefully consider what's being said. And when Europe talks about sending troops or a military contingent to Ukraine to monitor a ceasefire, that's something to pay attention to as well. Because Putin asks, why do we need troops there? Let's just put Ukraine under external control right away.
The element of external control.
And I can't think of any other explanation for how Putin decided on a presidential candidate for Ukraine from Russia. Because what is external governance for, if President Zelensky said that he was ready to hold elections? The only issue is security guarantees, so that Putin can't resume hostilities once martial law is lifted. And if Trump even slightly supported his own initiatives, he would have said, Vladimir, stop, let's do a ceasefire first, and then we'll figure out how to hold elections. But Trump's logic doesn't make sense. And his actions are undoubtedly driven by his bias against Ukraine and an unquestionable bias towards Russia. That's why I'm paying attention to Putin's words, and that's why I'm sharing them with you. Because it seems to me that they won't disappear without a trace. In fact, they could even provoke a new wave of information attacks against Ukraine. And not just information attacks. Suddenly, Trump might get the idea to initiate some kind of sanctions against Azov. And so it begins again. It started in 2014 with Maidan, 8 years of bombing Donbas blaming us, and in 2022 they were ready to negotiate, but then Johnson arrived. What we've heard, discussed, and explained many times before, Putin just repeated in his rhetoric. And of course, Kyiv immediately reacted to Putin's accusations and advised him to urgently take some pills to get his brain working.
If Putin is once again trying to figure out who he needs to cooperate with in order to make any serious progress toward ending this war, maybe he should just take a few pills to help get his brain functioning properly, assuming such pills still have any effect on him at this point.
However, I wouldn't search for Putin's brains. As for the White House, which might have been the intended target, they didn't take long to respond either. So, just last night, they responded to Putin's statement about temporary administration in Ukraine for holding elections. And the response was clearly not in favor of the Kremlin leader. A representative from the White House National Security Council emphasized that the governance of Ukraine is determined by its constitution and the people of the country. Thanks. It's complicated, as recent US statements suggested Ukraine should hold presidential elections. Even despite the ongoing war, it needs to be done sooner rather than later, with even members of the new Trump administration citing Britain, which held elections during wartime, as an example. In particular, the U.S. Special Representative for the Middle East, Witkoff, stated in an interview with the controversial journalist Tucker Carlson that holding presidential elections in Ukraine is a necessary step, and Ukrainian leadership agrees with this. I would gladly quote Witkoff's direct words in confirmation of this, but his statement came in response to a question from Tucker Carlson, asking whether elections could be held in Ukraine, given that the Russians aren't willing to sign any agreement with President Zelensky because they consider him illegitimate. To which Witkoff responded affirmatively. Yes, they agreed on this, and he provided no further details. In response to Putin's statement, Ukraine's Ministry of Foreign Affairs proposed establishing temporary UN governance in Russia, starting with Vorkuta. The ministry sarcastically noted that the local residents would probably benefit from any government other than Putin's, which is burning billions on a criminal war against Ukraine. Meanwhile, President Zelensky once again reminded both Russia, the US, and Witkoff about the dangers of repeating Moscow's narratives and confirmed that, yes, after the war ends in Ukraine, when martial law is lifted, elections will be held in accordance with Ukrainian law. No one will deliberately delay them. Elections in Ukraine are not just a political process, they are a real challenge. The state must be fully prepared to organize these efforts, which includes updating voter lists and ensuring that soldiers, as well as the millions of displaced individuals, are able to cast their votes without obstacles. These are issues that will need to be addressed. Is the state ready to organize elections now? No. Is it ready to ensure a fair vote in conditions where polling stations are destroyed and millions of Ukrainians are scattered around the world? Not either. Can elections be held under a ceasefire, not stable peace? Not either, because we can clearly see how temporary ceasefires play out in practice. Perhaps that's exactly what frightened our peacekeepers into hesitation or retreat. France and Britain's plan for peacekeeping forces in Ukraine is failing, according to the Wall Street Journal, and it reports that coalition talks lasted several hours, including a phone call with Donald Trump. And what came of it? Right, nothing. Emmanuel Macron was unable to secure a public commitment from his allies to send their troops. While he did express a willingness to move forward with the plan, he made it clear that any progress would only be made through private discussions and behind closed doors. European leaders, specifically, are concerned about whether the US will support the European contingent if Russia attacks it in Ukraine. Even a pause in hostilities along the front lines will require real-time monitoring from US satellites. And Paris and London want US missile defense systems to protect the troops and logistical support, such as air-to-air refueling and planes for transporting soldiers. And as far as I understand, the US has not promised this and may not be willing to. By the way, the next coalition meeting could take place in Kyiv. Delegations from Britain, France, and Germany are scheduled to arrive in the capital to work together and develop a comprehensive plan for a ceasefire.
Today, we agreed that Europe will be represented by France, the United Kingdom, Macron, and Starmer. I believe this is also important. This is a clear position, and we want to send this signal to all other partners. Of course, including the US.
The issue of European peacekeepers is on the agenda. It is expected that British and French units will be deployed in major cities, ports, and around critical infrastructure. France is proposing, as one of the options, to place European peacekeepers along the Dnieper River in Ukraine, far from the front line, reports the Associated Press. NATO countries are also preparing for the post-war phase and aiming to deter further Russian aggression. This means that no one is saying that aggression won't happen. Everyone understands that it will, the question is only when. Some even say it could happen after active combat operations. As sad as it is, this seems to be the only security guarantee for Ukraine being discussed in Europe. Additionally, NATO has stated that it will deploy troops in Ukraine if three conditions are met, according to NATO's Military Committee Chairman, General Dragan.
First, there must be a complete ceasefire, observed by both sides. Second, a strong mandate is necessary, ideally under the auspices of the UN. Third, it should be a highly authoritative and capable multinational force, made up not only of European troops but also including contributions from other nations, with enough personnel to ensure a strong and lasting presence along the entire Russia-Ukraine border.
In his view, the primary security guarantee for Ukraine continues to be its own armed forces, which play a crucial role in ensuring the nation's defense and protection. Over the 3 years of war, thanks to their resilience and the support received, they have reached an extraordinarily high level of effectiveness and continue to strengthen. Ukraine will continue to receive vital assistance from several countries in the form of weapons supplies, training, and enhanced cooperation. This will also allow Ukraine to restore capabilities that were depleted by the war and reorganize its armed forces to ensure the necessary deterrents to prevent further aggression.
After the war, a sustainable peace is needed. This cannot be another Minsk III. Russia must not use a ceasefire to regroup and should never again attempt to seize even a single square centimeter of Ukrainian land. This is why NATO allies provide such significant support to Ukraine. It is not only important for Ukraine's security but also for the security of all of Europe and the world.
Therefore, we are watching the negotiations and continuing to support the Ukrainian army, which is the main guarantee of security. Even NATO understands this. Because although Donald Trump spoke about 24 hours to peace, it is only the armed forces of Ukraine that can actually guarantee those 24 hours of peace.